I'm Amy Griffiths, and you're listening to Island Life on Manx Radio. Tonight, I want to talk about smartphones. Now, as a child of the 90s, I've grown up seeing technology evolve literally before my very eyes. I was one of the Nokia 3210's original users when I was at primary school, playing Snake and obsessively choosing between the set of monophonic ringtones, like the classic that is Kick. I then upgraded to various smartphones throughout my teen years, paying 10p to send a text, only being able to send the new polyphonic ringtones to my friends using Bluetooth or infrared, and long before social media. It was a simpler time. So why am I taking you on this trip down memory lane? Well, in recent months, a debate started gaining traction about whether children should be allowed to have all singing, all dancing smartphones while they're in school, or even at all. It started when St Ninian's High School announced it'll be banning students from using their smartphones for the whole school day, unless they have a genuine reason to, for example, to monitor a medical condition. Hundreds of you responded to our news story about it and weighed in on the debate. It led to Education Minister Daphne Kane telling me government is planning to make that a standard policy across all the island's high schools.
I would obviously support the schools in bringing forward the policies for their individual school and school rules. As far as a wider policy on mobile phones goes, it is actually something that we have been developing in the department, and we haven't quite completed it before the end of term, as perhaps we'd have liked, because we've had rather a lot on. But indeed, we are finishing the policy, after which we will be consulting with schools. But obviously schools have the autonomy to introduce the policies that are right for their individual locations. I would very much hope that it could be implemented in the September term, but possibly not from the very start of the year. But I would hope in the autumn term and the earlier part of the autumn term if possible.
And the policy you're looking at, would that be to be scrapping smartphones in all of the island schools?
The basis of the policy will be that phones are turned off and stored away while students are in school, and parents who need to contact the student would be able to do so through the school office, and likewise the student contacting the parent via the school office. But we just know that the policy not to have mobile phones, it's from feedback from parents and education professionals that this is something that they think will be seriously beneficial to the school community and the individual students. And I know that having visited QE2 High School, it's already a policy there and there are no phones in use. One of the teachers remarked to me that it was instantly noticeable when the ban on mobile phones in school came in. The level of conversation over the lunch break was noticeably louder. No phones, people talking to each other. But there are the wider policies to address that mobile phone use in schools does result in lesson disruption, bullying, there's damage to devices and also inappropriate use. So I think in some ways it would be helpful for the island to have a blanket overarching policy from the centre and for some consistency of how that's applied.
There's more and more evidence to suggest as well that having mobile phones and particularly smartphones from a younger age can be really detrimental to mental health as well. And with CAMHS already has an extremely long waiting list, more and more children needing to use its services. And is this something that you're hoping could potentially have a wider reaching impact as well?
I think all the research, if you read from educators generally, societal, social issues, not just mental health, but actually developmentally, screen time for young children, we've known since Square Eyes TV warnings dating back to my childhood, but it feels a bit like cigarettes. You didn't think there was any risk. They were even encouraged, new technology. And as a technology, we need to make sure that young people know the appropriate use of technology within schools. However, in lessons and the distraction it causes and the rivalry, plus the impact on social interaction as well as individual mental health, there's very little that I've read in recent years that is positive about unlimited access to mobile phones for increasingly younger children. But I think the policy will be communicated with parents, and the schools then will hopefully have some consistency and a backup, I suppose, because for some it will be really controversial. And obviously I must say that there is the caveat that there will be exceptions where certain usage of mobile phones will be permitted for medical reasons, for instance. But generally, I hope and trust that for many people will see this as a benefit.
I suppose on the other side of the argument, there will be some parents who would argue it is my choice to decide whether or not my child has a phone and then has access to the phone. I mean, can you see things from that perspective?
I've got teenagers. I know all of us are able to see where each other is on the devices. And the messages I get from my children are, please top up my lunch card or bus card or whatever it is. But actually there is a responsibility that, you should plan your day, you should have those things sorted out beforehand. And actually when you're in the school buildings, if that's the rule and that's across everybody, then I just think in terms of the positives that brings outweighs the negatives.
Don't call me up, I'm going out tonight, feeling good now you're out of my life, don't want to talk about us.
Education Minister Daphne Kane there on plans to ban smartphones in schools. Now that smartphone specifically, it doesn't apply to the old brick phones we used to have, which coincidentally or not, I have noticed one Manx provider advertising deals for the ever nostalgic Nokia 3210 ahead of the new school term starting. But the ban has proven to be a controversial topic for many parents. Some argue that too many lessons need students to use their phones or are even asked to use them when there isn't enough equipment to go around a class. For Lindsay Miller, though, it's a question of safety. She told me the only way she found out her child was being bullied and was able to prove it was from videos that he'd recorded.
I'm for and against it because I appreciate that children are using smartphones to film things that are happening, and I'm against that. I don't agree with that. And I know that schools are actually asking children to use their phones occasionally in class, but my main reason as why I'm against it is actually my son was bullied. He'd locked himself in the toilet. There was children kicking the doors, punching the doors, throwing water over him. And actually, he messaged me to tell me what was going on. And I said, right, put your phone on record in your pocket. You're not actually recording anyone in person, but we want to hear what's going on. So we've got that evidence as to what is happening, because the school were none the aware what was happening to him. And I wanted to know what was going on myself. And he recorded that, and the children actually named each other that were involved in the situation. So again, it brought up what was happening to my son and they were able to deal with it. I think without that evidence, it probably would have continued.
Having to hear that, though, must have been so distressing for you as a parent.
It was horrible, actually, listening to the video. When my son sent it through to me, it was awful knowing that this was happening to him. And he is on the spectrum, so he didn't know how to deal with that situation. He found it really, really difficult, and he was crying his eyes out, locked in that toilet. And I just felt so sorry for him and me not being there to protect him. And I was trying to get him out of the toilets, but he was just too scared to leave, even when the people doing what they'd done had left. So to be able to phone the school and say, look, I've heard what's happening. Somebody needs to get in them toilets and help my son. If he didn't have his phone, he could have stayed in there all day. And would they have noticed he was missing? I don't know.
And what was the response from the school in that situation?
They were really good about the fact that they knew what was going on now. They were really good with dealing with what had happened, and they dealt with the bullies appropriately. But they actually turned around to my son and told him that he shouldn't be recording, regardless of whether it was in his pocket or not, which I clearly, in a nice way, argued with them that this wasn't acceptable. You know, you wouldn't have known what was going on. You wouldn't have heard what had happened. Actually, you could clearly hear the door being kicked in. They were trying to get in at my son, and they wouldn't have heard that. They wouldn't have known how severe this could have been, and what would they have done to my son if they'd have got in. So with having that, they were able to deal with the bullies appropriately, and they actually got suspended for it.
So when your son is at school, how regularly are you in contact with him, especially as you say, if he is on the spectrum and has extra needs?
Yeah, he'll contact me. Usually he's really good to not have his phone on. He will switch it off during lessons. And then he'll turn his phone back on at break time or lunchtime, and he'll send me a message to say how things are going, if something's happened. And I've told him to go to the office or speak to the teachers. But to be able to speak to him and find out how his day is going, what has happened to him that day, or if nothing's happened, is kind of a lifeline to me because I know he's safe.
The policy itself is only going to be referring to smartphones specifically. So there's nothing against an old brick phone, for example. Is that something that you think you would consider or would be a suitable alternative if he's not allowed to have a smartphone on during school hours?
I'm not really sure about that because I think having the phone available where he could actually record it as a video, I know it was in his pocket and you could clearly just see his pocket lining, but you could hear the noise, you could hear more about it. And he actually did at one point, he did take the phone out of his pocket and you've seen the door being kicked in. You'd never seen anybody in that video, and being able to actually pull that phone out and record what was going on around him, that was a bit of a godsend because you could clearly see how severe this incident was.
And do you think it would have been taken as seriously had he not had that evidence?
No, I don't think it would have been taken seriously because it would be his word against theirs. And if they found out who the children were, my son could have easily gone and said it was such and such, but prove it. Where is his proof that this is what's happened, this is what's gone on? I don't think they would have realised that they genuinely were kicking the door in. They would have realised they were throwing water over him because he was soaking wet, but they wouldn't have realised that they were actually kicking the door in. So no, I don't believe it would have been.
The department has said that there will be some exceptions to the rule. For example, a lot of children these days who have diabetes will monitor it using their phones, for example, and other medical conditions, those things like that. Would you like to see your son be included in an exemption to that then?
Yeah, I would. But then I also think, there's going to be the usual kick-off, which is, why is it one rule for one and another for another? So, there's for and against arguments on that point of view. But I think children that are on the spectrum at least should be included in that because they find it quite hard to express themselves. And if he has got that option to be able to just put it in his pocket and film what's going on, then at least that option's there for them to hear what is happening to him.
Lindsay Miller sharing her son's experiences with me.
Strange how a phone call can change your day, take you away from the feeling of being alone. Bless the telephone.
You're listening to Island Life on Manx Radio, where we're discussing whether children should be allowed to have access to smartphones during the school day. It's as the Department of Education is looking to ban them in schools. But some people are asking if the policy goes far enough. Megan Kennish is a mum from Ramsey. She started a Facebook group hoping to empower parents to limit their children's access to smartphones completely. She told me why it's something that worries her.
Most of mine come down to my child's development, my child's sense of self. I want them to know what they love to do in real life before they fall in love with a screen. I want them to decide what they think is beautiful before they are upheld to beauty standards. I want them to be bored so they can be imaginative. I want them to play outside. I want them to be able to process their emotions with me before broadcasting them online. And I suppose if you flip that, I don't want them to see things that they can't unsee. And I don't want them to have access to the 24 hours of news cycle before they can process that properly. And I don't want them critically to be dependent.
Smartphones do seem to be so ingrained in our daily lives these days, and they can be hard to escape. And is it fair, I suppose, to ask children to have to give that up when, say, their friends are playing on their smartphones and talking to each other on their smartphones and they're missing out from those conversations?
Instead of asking, is it fair for them to have that taken away, I would ask, is it fair to give it to them in the first instance? And I think this is really the crux of why I'm here, is that if we all decide to take this action together, then that question of will they be the only one won't be a question anymore. Because, well, I won't say none of them because I think that's quite unrealistic, but the majority of children, hopefully, their parents would have made the decision to not give them a smartphone. I believe that the Isle of Man is a small enough jurisdiction to be nimble. We have the potential to make great change on our island. And our parliament and our population is equipped to make those changes quickly and efficiently too. So why not be ahead of the game?
You can actually put restrictions on things, so you can restrict either the apps that your child is using or how long they're using them for and things like that. Do you not think that goes far enough?
Yeah, absolutely. Those restrictions are great, and I would encourage parents to use them if they don't already. But I think, and I'll be the first to admit that I think it would only take a quick Google from a teenager to say how to get around parenting restrictions. And they're probably, to give teenagers their due, tech savvy enough to figure that out themselves. I wouldn't say it's a completely watertight approach, but I'm not at all against it. It's a really, really good step in the right direction. I just want parents to know that they're not alone. I feel like this. I know at least 250 other parents feel like this because they've joined this group and they're on the WhatsApp chats. Chances are there'll be a handful of other parents in your child's class who feels the same, and you just need to know who they are, because then you can support each other and you can bounce ideas off each other and have a bit of community around the subject too.
The argument as well is that you're not saying that they shouldn't have a phone full stop, just
No.
not one that has all of the capabilities that a smartphone has.
Yeah, I think that's key as well. Like, I and the other parents who feel like this, we're not against technology. Technology is fabulous, and I think our children absolutely need to be technology literate, because that's just the future, isn't it? They need to have access to technology. They need to learn how to use technology. I give my child my smartphone so they can, for example, when we go away, have a look what train we need to get. I just think that having a device in your hand in which you can access both the best and the worst of the world is not helping our children at all. And again, I think it comes back to the safety conversation, where a strong argument for smartphones, which I think is flawed, is, well, we want our children to have a life outside of the home and we want them to be safe when they go outside and play, so we need to give them a smartphone. And my answer to that would be, no, you don't need to give them a smartphone. You can give them a phone that can just make calls and texts, and that does the job, doesn't it? And I think my final words would be, don't give any device or app or company permission to steal your child's precious attention, because with that attention goes their time, their creativity, their passions, and maybe even their potential.
Megan's not alone in her thinking. In fact, just last week, one of the UK's largest network providers, EE, urged parents not to give primary school-aged children their own smartphone. The recommendation comes amid growing concern about the effects of smartphone and internet usage on children's mental health and behaviour. While access to the internet can support young people's education and social activities, as well as helping parents keep track of their whereabouts, some experts are warning it contributes to shorter attention spans, exposes children to harmful content, and displaces other activities such as playing outside or talking to friends. Chris Gregory runs Isle of Play, which is a charity giving children a safe space to push boundaries, take risks, and have their own independence. He's been telling me why he has concerns about children using smartphones.
Children are now so hooked on their phones that even when they're not on them, a lot of children are thinking about them. They're thinking about the conversations that are going on there. That means that the child is not living in the present. They are living in a virtual world that is not real. So children are not in touch with each other. They're in touch with each other's phones. And that is a real issue. The other part of the issue is that children's freedoms have diminished significantly. And when you diminish their freedoms, you're diminishing their ability to become competent individuals in the society that they are living. And what does that look like? Well, typically that has always looked like play, children's play. So what we need to be doing really is limiting access to phones, but also looking at the other factors that are preventing children from playing outside and developing the resilience that they need to combat the mental health issues that we are currently seeing.
And why is play so important to that? What kind of skills does it teach children just from playing? There is that assumption that by playing you're wasting time, but you, I'm assuming, would have a completely different viewpoint to that.
Well, it can seem like a complete waste of time, and it's very hard in a culture where we're so obsessed with outcomes and looking at what the outcomes are for everything. You know, with sport, we can measure the success by the number of medals that we've seen, by the times that children are completing a race in, etc. But with play, we don't know what the outcomes are before they've actually played. And even then, the outcomes are so deferred that we don't necessarily see it. But what we do know is that play helps children become more socially competent. It helps them to navigate risk better. It helps them become more resilient. And there's nothing else that we can do as adults that is as powerful as developing and shaping the brain as play. We can structure activities, we can try and control them and say, well, climbing up this rope on a harness to the top will help them, give them a sense of satisfaction that is comparable to, I don't know, a child choosing of their own volition to go and climb a tree without a harness. Climbing a tree without a harness on their own terms is one of the most powerful lessons that a child can have in terms of developing resilience, in terms of lessons of risk and reward. And it's only by doing it freely that those rewards can ever be taken. It cannot be given by just subscribing it to a child.
By then not building that resilience in those really early years, is that something that you think then will impact on mental health as they start to grow up?
Undoubtedly, I think the evidence is pretty clear. So it leaves us then with the question about what do we do about it? And that is where government does need to step in. We've just seen the Northern and Western Development Plan inquiry, and there has been very little notice of children's play within that. We need to be putting in place efficiency duties for all local authorities as they do in Wales, so we can look at what play is available, we can find deficits in that, and we can plug those deficits. Childhood is not a waiting room for adulthood. Childhood is childhood. It is incredibly important. It is one of the most important things in a child's life. And I think if we go to what Kate Bruner QC in her COVID report stated, that children's rights are not being adhered to, and for children, play is essential to their day-to-day lives.
Part of this conversation can make it sound like mobile phones, particularly smartphones, are kind of the root of all evil and the problems for all of our children. But there is a wider context that we do need to consider. And a lot of our children have been growing up with at least 3 years of virtual learning, not really being able to play out with their friends in the same way. And that is surely going to also be having an impact on how they're developing.
Yeah, there is no substitute for face-to-face interaction. We're often said, oh, what do you think my child should get as a toy or something to play with? There's nothing better for a child to play with than another child, or 2 children or 3 children. And that is sort of over the period that we were faced with COVID, that was magnified significantly. We produced a paper with Swansea University looking at the impact of children's behaviours and interactions with each other, because we were in the fortunate position of coming out of COVID before the rest of the UK, and to see how children's play was affected by that. But we have not set up, even now, the facilities for children to grab hold of play by the scruff of the neck and to enjoy it. If our schools are overly cautious of health and safety, schools are afraid to let children stand on the first rung of the fence because, it's not safe to do so. If we're so risk averse and we haven't got policies in place to protect our schools, to protect children's play, then we're hamstringing ourselves from the very, very beginning. It sounds like some monumental challenge, but it's actually a very, very simple thing. If we focus on the mental health crisis alone and we're trying to look for a remedy that's outside of our nature, then we're going to really struggle to be able to fix it. What we've got is a tool to remedy our mental health issues on the large, maybe not everything, and that's through children play, and that is how we develop and change. So our government needs to focus a strategy on this. Well, where is it that children are together? First of all, we can say they are together in schools. So we put in place a policy and a strategy that means that children have access to the best play opportunities while they're in school. We then look at our communities. Well, where is it that children want to play? They want to play on their doorsteps. Now, 40, 50 years ago, a child at the age of 8 could go 8 miles in any direction without an adult with a couple of friends. Now we're seeing children that can't go past the threshold of their own door. So why is that? Well, children should be able to play on their streets outside their homes, but the threats of cars is very real to parents, and so children can't play outside. Well, maybe we could look at temporary street closures, just an agreement with neighbours perhaps, that allow children to play out on the streets, play games of Kirby, draw on with chalks on the pavements, however that looks, play games of tag, ride their bikes, etc. That's the next part. We've got the development plans for local area development plans. Well, let's look at that. Well, why aren't we getting areas that are developed specifically for children to access? Why haven't we got an adventure playground? Like we've got Leicester's Yard, which is a brilliant facility where children can come after school. It's completely free for them to access. They can have food there. They can have tools there. They can have fires there. It's a place where children can be children. They can take risks. There are trained staff there that don't interfere unless they need to. It's a place for children to be children. Adventure playgrounds like that could be the hub for childhood around the island. And from those spaces, we can grow and the communities can be more child and play friendly.
Chris Gregory from Isle of Play there. Now, I do want to be really clear that the purpose of this programme isn't to scaremonger or pass any kind of judgment. I'm a parent myself, and I'm currently trying to navigate the minefield that is raising a child, and it can be incredibly overwhelming when you're bombarded with information left, right, centre that makes you question every single decision you make for your family. Ultimately, though, at home, what your child does is up to you, and only you know what is best. At school, though, the decision's being made for you, and it's going to be a no smartphone policy for the foreseeable future. But there's nothing to say our kids can't enjoy the simple pleasures we had with our brick phones way back when. I'm Amy Griffiths, and you've been listening to Island Life on Manx Radio. You can listen back to this programme at manxradio.com or by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider.